And let's begin in Washington. Richard Madden tells us where things stand tonight as we prepare for that 25% on steel and aluminum.
This is the latest reversal after yet another chaotic day full of threats and retaliation. President Trump agreed to halt the doubling of all Canadian steel and aluminum tariffs from 50% down to 25% after Ontario Premier Doug Ford agreed to suspend a surcharge on electricity into 3 northern U.S. border states. Now, Ford explained why he did this. He issued a statement saying he agreed to it after Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick agreed to meet with him later this week at the White House, where the two will apparently discuss tariffs and renewing the trilateral USMCA or NAFTA 2.0, even though I should note premiers don't negotiate federal treaties. So while this may seem like a de-escalation of sorts in this on-again, off-again trade war, from the White House perspective, it's a win. They say, look, they've stopped being taxed on imported energy, but they're still hitting Canadian steel and aluminum with 25% tariffs starting tomorrow. And Trump's trade advisor had some choice words for Ontario's premier. Watch this.
Frankly, the premier, he's been... I mean, look, just tamp it down, please, over there, okay? Just throwing down the hockey gloves. Stop that rhetoric, and let's just look at what we're trying to do. We love Canada, but look, there's some big issues there, and we're not going to tolerate anything but them stopping killing Americans and doing what's right with respect to things like steel and aluminum, which they've been dumping into our country, and that's stopping.
So there's a lot to unpack there, but ultimately the White House is framing these tariffs as leverage, forcing its allies to strengthen borders and stop the flow of fentanyl. And later today, Trump told business executives his tariffs could also increase. Trump previewed the bigger picture, how they fit into his broader economic agenda. Take a listen.
They don't want to pay 25% or whatever it may be. It may go up higher, maybe go up higher. Look, the higher it goes, the more likely it is they're going to build. And ultimately, the biggest win is not the tariff. That's a big win. That's a lot of money. But the biggest win is if they move into our country and produce jobs. That's a bigger win than the tariffs themselves.
Now, throughout the day, Trump still pushed that 51st state nonsense, calling the border a, quote, artificial line. So that's probably not going to go over well with the Canadians. But he is signaling in his very Trumpy way that he's open to negotiate with Canada using tariffs as a weapon. So, Ian, the next big look ahead here is Thursday when Ford meets with Secretary Lutnick at the White House. At this point, it's unclear who else will be part of the delegation, but ultimately, if Canada can land a win.
And speaking of people reacting in a negative way, the uncertainty has led to yet another downturn in the stock market.
Yeah, another dizzying day. You know, Trump is saying the U.S. economy is in a transition period. His press secretary is calling this market sell-off a, quote, snapshot of a moment in time. But the signs are there of Wall Street growing increasingly concerned of the economic chaos and uncertainty. Markets were down today with steep back-to-back losses, some indexes on the brink of a correction. And we're also seeing jitters from corporate America. Delta Airlines slashed its earnings forecast, warning consumer confidence and uncertainty could change how Americans choose to spend their money. JP Morgan and Chase analysts have raised their forecast for a recession this year from 30% at the start of the year to 40%, reportedly citing, quote, extreme U.S. policies. There's also Goldman Sachs. Now, it modestly boosted its recession probability to 20%, saying the White House has the option to pull back policy changes if downside risks begin to look more serious. So we know Trump likes to take credit for market rallies, but he is sloughing it off when his policies are shaking corporate and consumer confidence, and it's really been weighing on the markets for the past 3 weeks. So as these tariffs escalations continue, the markets are clearly reacting in real time.
All right, Richard, thank you so much. So, like us, you probably have been watching these developments throughout the day. First of all, just trying to keep them straight. And then secondly, trying to understand what could possibly be behind the strategy, if it is indeed a strategy. So let's bring in somebody who can maybe help us untangle all of this. Carlo Dade is Director of International Policy for the School of Public Policy at the University of Calgary, and Calgary is where he is this afternoon. Carlo, can you make sense of this back and forth and the confusion over tariffs between Canada and the U.S.?
I can certainly make an attempt at it. I don't know that anyone other than Donald Trump himself could probably give a clear explanation, and I doubt even that. But yeah, this is the new American trade policy that has been taken by Donald Trump, and he's pretty much botched what the American right, what the America First movement has been proposing since last summer, and he's apparently winging it as he goes along.
So at some point earlier today, we heard that Trump was going to impose a 50% tariff on steel and aluminum. Now it's back down to 25%. Do you think the 50% was ever a true consideration by Trump? And would the reduction be considered a win for Canada?
Well, again, it's impossible with Donald Trump to give a simple yes, no, conclusive answer. I'd say the probability, though, is high that this is something that Trump made up. I haven't seen this level referenced in work by thinkers and economists in the America First movement, and I haven't seen it mentioned by others in the administration. It doesn't mean that someone may have mentioned this or someone else may have done this, but this doesn't appear to have a basis in the work that was done within the America First movement.
Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario, certainly got the attention of, it seems like, Trump and others in Washington with his energy surcharge, the surcharge on electricity. And he says, though he has paused it for now, it's still a tool that the province could use if talks do break down. What do you make of that as a strategy by the province of Ontario?
Well, the key word there is province of Ontario. This is ideal for Ontario, but certainly not for others in Canada, and certainly not for us out here on the prairies of the West Coast. But for Ontario, I think electricity exports are less than 1%, maybe 0.1% of what the province exports to the U.S., yet it's critically important for the Americans. So it was a good card for Ontario to play. That wouldn't work in BC, and it certainly wouldn't work here in Alberta.
You are an academic. You study the relations between Canada and the United States, among other things. You do the research. You try to kind of figure out what the big strategy is. And though we've touched on this so far in the conversation, I want to ask you directly, does any of what's happening now emanating from the White House make sense to you?
No, and it doesn't make sense. What's more important, though, so come from a think tank background, practical, not academic. And I spent years studying the America First movement, talking to folks in the movement. This does not make sense within the thinking of the America First movement. Now, there are different factions within the movement, but I can't see any faction within America First being happy with this proposal for the tariffs. And I can see factions being upset with Donald Trump for backing away from a move that would have taken auto manufacturing jobs from Ontario and moved them to the U.S. So this is not Trump shooting himself in one foot. This is Trump shooting himself in both feet.
So explain that to me more explicitly then. In what way do you think he has kind of disappointed or perhaps even angered some elements of the America First movement?
The economic populists in the America First movement want to see jobs come back to the U.S. This was the explicit policy of the American Compass Group, America First Policy Institute, and certainly Robert Lighthizer in the work that he did to prepare for a second administration. The prospect of being able to move auto jobs, given the cost to the U.S., given the harm to the U.S., would have justified a sacrifice for economic pain and making tariffs. Taking that off the table will make that group unhappy. And then there are others like the Commerce Secretary who come from Wall Street, who have recently become part of the America First movement, that would be unhappy with the damage that this would cause to American workers and to the economies of New York and states that are reliant on Ontario energy. So there's increasing infighting within the America First movement, and this will only make that infighting worse.
All right. Well, I do appreciate your analysis, Carlo. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Carlo Dade, Director of International Policy for the School of Public Policy at the University of Calgary.